So the headline is conferences could start kicking teams out of their league if they try to give too much NIL to players. Conferences could start kicking schools out of their league. Power 4 leagues. Okay. We're not talking G5. Power 4 leagues. The SEC could kick out a team for trying to pay an athlete too much NIL in the revenue sharing era. And now an SEC program is basically trying to use state law to get around that, which means that this fight is about to get really, really dirty. And of course, it all has ramifications in the Big 12, because this will kind of set the tone on how NIL is going to work in the new era. And is it going to become just a total arms race where you got to come up with $20 million for revenue sharing and then whatever else it's going to take above and beyond that to keep up with the Joneses in football and basketball? Seems like a really tough thing when we've got Jamie Pollard, the AD at Iowa State, coming on here and saying your choice is to be subsidized by the university or become Northern Iowa, right? So this is very important for the Big 12 to see how this all works out. And it's probably going to be lawsuits, stuff in court, more of that. So get on your lawyer hat. Everybody seems to have one these days on the internet. Make sure you get that on. Get your law degree up on the wall. Make sure everybody knows you passed the bar, and here we go. So this is from a Ross Dellinger story. Tennessee Senate Bill number 536 paves the way for state schools like Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and Memphis and their affiliated collectives to break House settlement-related rules and prevents college sports' new enforcement entity from penalizing those schools. So what it means is, now, Ross Dellinger says, in layman's terms, the law is a launched missile toward plans from the NCAA and power conferences to actually police the revenue-sharing era of college sports. So they're trying to blow up the athlete compensation cap, the severe penalties for rule breakers, and policies that prevent phony booster-backed NIL deals. They're trying to blow up any enforcement of pay for play. What this law would state is like, hey, if Deloitte, which is the third party that's supposed to be adjudicating any case of any NIL deal, right, to make sure that it's fair market value, if Deloitte is trying to come in and say, hey, Tennessee, you can't pay Nico Iamaleava $2 million from a booster because that's not fair market value for those autographs that he signed, this state law is saying, you don't have to worry about that. Tennessee, you don't have to worry about that because you're not subject to any of those rules. That's the gamesmanship that we have going on here, because it's just such a mess from a legality standpoint. NCAA leadership let all of this get blown to hell in court so that they have no real power to enforce anything. They're trying to throw a new third party out there, but anything that you really try to do technically is something that probably would get you in trouble in court. You know, this is the type of thing that probably could wind up in a much bigger legal battle moving forward. And I'm not sure that the state of Tennessee wouldn't win. But it's just such a gaggle that we're in this position where there's, who knows what's going to happen. And it has such massive trickle down impact on how the rest of the sport is going to work. Because if you can just bypass any entity like that, one, you're going to have every state racing to try and get one of these laws on the books, or they'll just completely ignore it anyway. And then two, we're just back to who has the multi-billionaire booster, like Texas Tech, and they'll be able to just outspend everybody and fill up their roster that way. Whereas if you actually have some guardrails in place, then it becomes more of a level playing field, theoretically. Okay. Now here's the rest of the Dellinger story. He says power conference executives do have plans to combat such laws. So look, power conferences aren't going to just take this sitting down. This was really the big bombshell part of the news this week. The Big 10, SEC, Big 12, and ACC, all the Power 4 conferences, they're circulating a draft of a groundbreaking and first-of-its-kind document intended to prevent universities from using state laws to violate new enforcement rules. And it would require schools to waive their right to pursue legal challenges against the new enforcement entity. So the schools have responded, the leagues rather have responded by saying, we don't like this. We need you guys to all sign this here sheet of paper saying that you're not going to use these state laws to get around what we're trying to do with NIL. And you also cannot sue this. You can't say, hey, we think that this enforcement entity is not legal because it's limiting the amount of money that a student athlete can make. So we're going to sue you. You're waiving your right to sue, waiving your right to use the state laws, waiving your right to sue. That's pretty wild. I'm sure a lot of you out there are like, hey, are the schools actually going to do this? Like, why would any school do this? It's a good question, but it seems like this is moving forward. And I'm going to get to some quotes later on, actually, from Big 12 admins that I think will kind of tell you why the conferences and schools as a unified front actually are in a lot of ways on board with this. Yeah. Even if their state law is contradictory and would exempt the CSC, College Sports Commission, from lawsuits from member schools over enforcement decisions, offering instead a route for schools to pursue arbitration. Okay, a little more from Ross Dellinger there. The document is meant to be signed by all Power Conference schools, perhaps as well as others opting into the settlement, so it could go even beyond Power 5. The consequence for not signing the agreement, sorry, a little clunky here, guys, is steep. A school risks the loss of conference membership and participation against other Power League programs. Quote, you have to sign it or we don't play you, says one athletic director who has seen the document. So the threat is, again, we'll kick you out of the conference. If you're going to try and use these state laws, Tennessee, to get around this and pay guys more than other schools can, see ya. You're kicked out of the conference. We won't play you. Now, again, a lot of this, I'm sure a lot of you would be skeptical. Like, okay, if this actually happens, is the SEC actually going to kick out a school of that magnitude or nature? If Ohio State is doing this, would the Big Ten kick Ohio State out of the conference? I've even seen people being like, hey, what is Fox going to do if Ohio State is like being kicked out of the conference because they have the Ohio State, Michigan is their jam. A lot of money's on the line there. How would they actually let that happen? I mean, these are all good questions and all things that would probably be taken to court and have to be adjudicated. And how long does that take? And then where are we at? Guys, I don't know. But this is the state of the world right now in college athletics. And it's not a good one. It's not a good one. But this is, if you want insight into the real motivation of this, and I think this is just very, very appropriate because we're getting comments here from a couple of Big 12 athletic directors on this. And it wasn't just them, by the way. There was also a quote from Joe Castiglione at Oklahoma that was along these same lines here. But let's start with Mack Rhoades, Baylor athletic director. He was quoted in this story. Mack Rhoades says, quote, if we go back to external NIL that is separate from the house pool revenue share and back to a pay-for-play model, then why did we even settle? We're going to spend $20.5 million and then on top of it, go pay for play with the collectives. He's basically saying, like, what was the point of doing revenue sharing in this whole house settlement if we're just going to have, in essence, the same situation that we have now, except it becomes almost more expensive for the schools now because there's this minimum that we have to hit of $20.5 million before we even go above and beyond that. And I mean, I definitely see the point for schools on that. Like, why go through all of this if we're not going to? It's kind of like, if we're going to do this, do it right. And this is where I come back to the presidential commission on college sports. Like, if you're going to do this right now at this moment of critical mass where it feels like, you better do something or it's going to get way too out of control and too far down the road and you won't ever be able to fix it. Well, then do everything right, man. Do it big and do it right. And this is a way to do that. You kind of would have to have some enforcement like this to keep it from going too wild with pay for play. Here's what Rick George said. He's the athletic director at Colorado. Quote, in this new era, we're already trying to circumvent the rules. We've got to stop trying to circumvent the rules. Now, I understand why Rick George is saying that. I would also tell him the history of college sports has basically been everybody trying to circumvent the rules in one form or another. So I don't know that we'll ever get away from that in college sports. That just kind of goes hand in hand with what it is that we do here. But I mean, he is right. Of course, everybody has started trying to circumvent the rules. Of course, that has already happened, man. That's just what schools are going to do. So if you're a Big 12 school, if you're Texas Tech, there might be less on the line for you here. You would have some inherent advantages over the rest of the Big 12. BYU perhaps as well because of the financial backing that you have. If it is going to be free for all, pay for play beyond the revenue sharing cap. But I think for virtually all Big 12 schools, and even for your Texas Tech and BYUs of the world, that's not a game that you want to play like in perpetuity forever with the rest of the Big 10 and SEC schools as they continue to make more and more money. It's probably going to be better for everybody involved here from Big 12 and ACC country if you can actually enforce all of this. So I'm going to continue to hope that happens, even though a lot of it may not make the most sense legally. I don't know how exactly this works. I think this is where your presidential commission hopefully figures something out. So Godspeed, Cody Campbell. Godspeed, my friend. Let's get it figured out.